The house was quiet. Too quiet, some might say. It was a chilly morning on March 14, 1879, in the small city of Ulm, Germany. Inside a modest home, a baby boy had just been born. His name was Albert Einstein. But even from the beginning, something about him seemed different. His mother, Pauline, looked into his tiny face and wondered why he hadn't cried out like most babies do. Days passed, then weeks, and still, little Albert barely made a sound. Friends who visited the house whispered behind closed doors. "Why doesn't he speak?" His parents worried, but they waited. Months turned into years. Finally, around the age of 3, Albert spoke his first sentence. But even then, he didn't speak like other children. Still, he wasn't like the other kids in many ways. While other children ran around in the streets, Albert often sat alone, lost in thought. He would stare at things for hours, especially things that moved, spun, or ticked. There was one moment that would change everything. One afternoon, his father gave him a small gift, a simple compass. It didn't look special, just a small round box with a needle inside. But when Albert held it in his hands, his eyes lit up. That little needle moved all by itself, always pointing in the same direction. Nothing was touching it, no strings, no hands, no wind. Yet it moved. "Why?" he whispered. Albert couldn't stop thinking about it. What was making the needle move? Was there something invisible, something powerful, that controlled it? From then on, Albert began to look at everything around him differently. He didn't just accept what people told him. He wanted to understand why. Why did things fall down and not up? Why did light move so fast? At home, his mother filled the rooms with music. She taught him to play the violin, and though he wasn't very good at first, he grew to love it. It became his secret escape, a place where the world made sense through sound. Music and science, those two things would follow him all his life. In school, he hated memorizing facts. He didn't see the point. "Why remember something if I don't understand it?" he would ask. But schools back then didn't care about understanding. They wanted obedience, rules, and respect. One day, a teacher told him something that would stay with him forever. "You'll never amount to anything, Einstein." Imagine being a child and hearing those words. Some kids would give up, but not Albert. Albert sat at his desk, staring at the chalkboard. The teacher's voice droned on like a distant hum. "Facts. Dates. Formulas. Memorize this. Don't ask why." Albert wanted more than facts, he wanted meaning. So he turned to something better. Books. Not just schoolbooks, but big, complicated ones. Books about math, science, philosophy. He read about the great minds of the past, Newton, Maxwell, and others who had tried to explain how the world works. He didn't understand it all at first, but that didn't stop him. He wasn't waiting to be taught. He was teaching himself. But life wasn't easy. His family moved to Italy when he was a teenager, and Albert stayed behind in Germany to finish school. He hated the rigid school system. One day, he couldn't take it anymore. He walked into the headmaster's office and announced he was leaving school. He didn't have a diploma. Eventually, he joined his family in Italy. But his dream was to study science properly, to find a place where his curiosity wouldn't be a problem, it would be a gift. So he applied to a prestigious school in Switzerland, the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich. He failed the entrance exam. Yes, Albert Einstein failed. But not in math or science. Those scores were brilliant. It was the other subjects, like language and history, that pulled him down. Still, the school saw his potential and told him to try again after finishing some extra schooling. He didn't give up. He studied hard, applied again, and this time, he got in. After years of studying in Zurich, Albert had a degree in hand and big dreams in his heart. He thought finding a job as a science teacher would be easy. But school after school turned him down. Some said he was too quiet. Others said he didn't seem like a leader. Doors closed, one after the other. It was frustrating. He had done everything right. He had worked hard. He believed in his ideas. But nobody seemed to believe in him. And so, Albert Einstein, one of the brightest minds of the century, took a job at a tiny office in Bern, Switzerland. Not as a scientist. Not even as a teacher. As a patent clerk. His job, reading through people's inventions, machines, gadgets, designs, and checking if their ideas were new. It was routine, repetitive work. Nothing exciting on the surface. But there was something beautiful about it, too. In that quiet office, surrounded by papers and stamps, Albert found something he hadn't had in years: time to think. He thought about clocks, motion, speed, and light. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. At night, after the office lights went dark, Albert would sit at his small wooden desk in his apartment, surrounded by books and papers. His wife, Mileva, often watched him work late into the night, scribbling numbers, lost in thought. He wasn't doing it for fame. He wasn't getting paid. No one was even watching. But in those silent hours, Albert was building something the world had never seen before. He was about to break the rules of how we understood reality. And he would do it, not from a university, not from a lab, but from a tiny desk in a forgotten office. The year was 1905. Albert Einstein was 26 years old, still unknown, still working at the patent office. All the hours spent thinking, wondering, imagining, they were starting to come together. That year, he wrote not one, not two, but 4 groundbreaking scientific papers. Each one could have made a scientist famous. Together, they would change the course of science forever. And he did it all in his spare time. First, he wrote about something called the photoelectric effect. It sounds complicated, but here's the wild part. He showed that light wasn't just a wave, it could act like tiny packets, or particles. This simple but powerful idea later helped build the foundation for quantum physics. Would win him the Nobel Prize. Second, he tackled a weird problem people had been arguing about for years: what's actually happening inside a glass of water? He showed that tiny, invisible particles, atoms, were moving constantly, bumping and jiggling around. This helped prove that atoms were real, at a time when some scientists still doubted it. Third, he introduced something called special relativity. This paper was different. It said something crazy, something most people wouldn't believe at first: time and space aren't fixed. They can stretch and slow down depending on how fast you're moving. Time could move slower for one person and faster for another. The faster you go, the weirder time and space behave. It was strange. It was bold. It went against everything people thought they knew. But the math worked. The logic was beautiful. And slowly, people started to listen. And finally, in his 4th paper, he dropped a little equation you might have heard of. E equals mc squared. 3 tiny letters and a number. But behind them, a universe-shaking idea. He had found the link between energy, E, and mass, m, with c superscript 2, the speed of light squared, showing just how powerful that connection was. He sent these papers off to a science journal with no fame, no fancy title, no university behind him. Just a curious mind. That year, 1905, would later be called Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year. But after 1905, things started to shift. At first, only a few scientists noticed his work. They read his papers, rubbed their eyes, read them again. Could this be right? Could time really slow down? Could energy and mass be the same thing? Some thought it was nonsense. Others thought it was genius. Then came 1915, 10 years after his miracle year. In 1919, during a solar eclipse, a British scientist named Sir Arthur Eddington took a team to Africa to photograph the stars near the sun. Because Einstein had predicted something no one had seen before: light would bend around the sun due to its gravity. If Einstein was right, the starlight would appear slightly out of place. And guess what? The photos showed exactly what Einstein had predicted. The world exploded. Headlines called him a genius, a prophet, the man who bent light. Newspapers across the globe splashed his face on the front page. He was suddenly more than a scientist, he was a legend. And Albert? He was overwhelmed. He hadn't changed. He still wore the same old clothes. Still walked with his hands in his pockets, thinking. But now, people followed him. Crowds gathered, reporters shouted, photographers begged for a smile. And deep down, Albert felt strange. He hadn't done all this for fame. He just wanted to understand. The spotlight was bright, but it was also heavy. People didn't just want answers, they wanted a hero. And Albert, with his wild hair and soft eyes, had become one. But being a genius in the spotlight wasn't always a blessing. But behind the smiling photographs and newspaper clippings, the world was changing, and not in a good way. It was the 1920s. Einstein was traveling the world, giving lectures, meeting leaders, sharing his ideas. People adored him. But back in his home country, Germany, storm clouds were gathering. Whispers turned into speeches. Fear turned into anger. And slowly, dangerously, that anger found a target: people like Albert. Einstein was Jewish. And in a time when anti-Semitism was rising like a tide, that fact became dangerous. Some newspapers began mocking him. Some scientists, jealous of his fame, threatened by his ideas, tried to tear him down. One even published a booklet titled 100 Authors Against Einstein. Then came 1933. Adolf Hitler rose to power. Germany became a place Albert no longer recognized. Jewish professors were fired. Books were burned. Threats turned real. Some said Einstein's name was even on a list, a target. So he made a painful decision. He left. He packed up his life, said goodbye to the country that had raised him, and boarded a ship for America. He would never live in Germany again. It was more than just a move. It was a heartbreak. He loved his homeland. He had built his life there, his discoveries. But now, it had turned against him. Still, Albert didn't grow bitter. Instead, he grew louder. From his new home in the US, he began to speak out, for peace, for justice, for freedom. He had become a voice of conscience. Einstein had always believed in peace. He once said, "I am not only a pacifist, I am a militant pacifist." He hated violence. And after fleeing Nazi Germany, his hatred for hatred had only grown deeper. But now, in 1939, the world stood at the edge of another great war. Germany was working on something terrifying, a weapon powered by the atom. A bomb so powerful, it could destroy entire cities in seconds. Albert knew the science. After all, E=mc² had shown the world how mass could be turned into energy. Now, others were turning that knowledge into destruction. And it scared him. Because if Hitler got the bomb first, the consequences would be unimaginable. So when fellow scientists approached him, physicist Leo Szilard among them, with an idea to write a letter to US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, Einstein didn't hesitate. He warned the president that Germany might be trying to build an atomic bomb, and that the US should begin researching one too, before it was too late. That single letter, signed by Einstein, helped spark the beginning of the Manhattan Project, America's secret race to build the bomb. It was one of the most important, and painful, moments of Einstein's life. Because the man who had spent his life fighting for peace, had just helped push the world toward the most destructive weapon it had ever known. When the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, Einstein was devastated. Tens of thousands of lives, gone in an instant. He spent the rest of his life speaking out against nuclear weapons, urging leaders to disarm, calling for global cooperation and peace. He had once unlocked the energy of the stars. Now, he feared what humanity might do with it. But even in his sorrow, he kept believing, in people, in science, in hope. Because that's who Albert Einstein was. Not just a genius, but a man who wanted a better world. As the world moved on after the war, so did Albert Einstein. But not toward fame or fortune. He had already tasted both, and neither truly satisfied him. Instead, in his later years, Albert settled into a quieter life in Princeton, New Jersey, at the Institute for Advanced Study. He didn't chase titles or awards. People still came from all over the world to meet him. They'd knock on the door expecting a scientific god, and be greeted by a man who looked like someone's kind old grandfather. He went on long walks. He spent his later years chasing what he called a unified theory, one single explanation for all the forces in the universe. Gravity, electricity, magnetism, all connected in a beautiful, simple law. But he never found it, and he was okay with that. And then, in 1955, at the age of 76, Albert Einstein passed away. He left no mansion, no empire, no grand monument. But he left something greater, an idea. That one person, with a mind full of questions and a heart full of wonder, can change the world. Einstein taught us that the universe is vast. But also, that the human spirit is just as big. And that, sometimes, the most powerful force in the world is a wondering mind.